I am a Yank in Sussex. This is part 3 of What is Sussex, and it continues with the history of Sussex, beginning with the aftermath of the Norman Conquest in 1066. Having defeated and killed the King of England, William may have hoped the English would immediately surrender, but they didn't. He spent the next 2 months consolidating his power in southeast England, and it wasn't until late December that he convinced the most powerful lords of England to accept him as their new king. He was finally crowned King of England on Christmas Day, 1066, but he continued to have to deal with revolts of one kind or another for many years, not only revolts by the remaining Saxon nobles, but also by his supposedly loyal fellow Normans. Sussex was of strategic importance to William, since the most direct route between England and William's lands in Normandy went through Sussex. It was therefore necessary for William to put Sussex under the close control of men whom he could trust, selected from among those who had fought for him at the Battle of Hastings and in conflicts in Normandy. In doing so, he wisely used the administrative organization that had already existed under the Anglo-Saxons. Under previous rulers, Sussex had been divided into 4 administrative areas. King William assigned lords over them, and eventually reorganized one of the areas, turning the 4 into 5. A later king split the westernmost district in 2, making a total of 6. These were called, east to west, Hastings, Pevensey, Lewes, Bramber, Arundel, and Chichester. I should note that the modern spelling and pronunciation of the word for these administrative districts is the word in this panel starting with R. To avoid YouTube's robot eavesdroppers, which if I pronounced it in the modern way, might flag this video as not safe for work or advertisers or kids or something, I'm going to use the probable Saxon pronunciation, Raap. While we really don't know for certain how that word was pronounced 1,000 years ago, because tape recorders hadn't been invented yet, scholarly research leads most linguists to believe that it was indeed pronounced Raap, which was related to or identical to the Old English word for rope. This has to do with its symbolic use to refer to a boundary or the area of land delineated by such a boundary. Well, anyway, a brief description of each of these Raaps is in order at this time, along with each of their castles, which were their administrative centers. I'll start the description with the borders of the original Saxon Raaps and show how they changed as Norman governance evolved over time. I'll start with the easternmost Raap, that of Hastings. It's actually a little different from the others because in the North Germanic settlement period, it wasn't settled by Saxons. The folk in Hastings were known as the Hastingas and were mainly Jutes from Jutland, just as the people of neighboring Kent were. Hastings was independent of the Sussex kings at first, but later became a sub-kingdom of Sussex, just before the kingdom of Sussex itself was annexed by the kingdom of Wessex. A short time after William the Conqueror was crowned King of England, he gave responsibility over the Raap of Hastings to one of his cousins, Robert, who was also Count of Eu in Normandy. His castle at Hastings, which was actually constructed by the invaders not long after they landed and immediately before the famous battle, overlooks the town of Hastings. The construction of Hastings Castle is actually depicted in one panel of the famous Bayeux tapestry, which depicts the conquest of England by King William. The next Raap to the west is called Pevensey. Its administrative center was at Pevensey Castle. As mentioned in the previous video on the history of Sussex, this castle pre-existed the Norman invasion, as it was originally built by the Romans. It was William the Conqueror's first conquest, captured immediately after the invaders landed in October 1066. It was an easy capture since its garrison had marched north with King Harold to help repel Norwegian invaders who had invaded northern England not long before the Normans arrived. Responsibility over the Raap of Pevensey was given into the hands of the conqueror's half-brother, Robert the Count of Mortain. To the west of Pevensey is the Raap of Lewes. This Raap was given into the hands of William de Warenne, who with Robert de Mortain had fought on the conqueror's side at the Battle of Hastings. It was de Warenne who built the castle that still stands in the middle of the town of Lewes. As a Yank in Sussex, the first time I saw the spelling of Lewes, I thought it was pronounced Lewes. But no, it's pronounced as 2 syllables, like how comedian and actor Jerry Lewis's last name is pronounced. The name derives from the Old English word for hill. In 1066, the next Raap over from Lewes was that of Arundel, although some authorities believe that the Raap was first called after the town of Burpham, just a couple of miles to the northeast of Arundel. This was because Burpham was the site of one of King Alfred the Great's forts, and there was no castle or fortification at Arundel until William the Conqueror's general, Roger de Montgomery, was given the lordship of Arundel, and he built Arundel Castle. Now, Roger de Montgomery was greatly trusted and relied upon by King William, and was frequently distinguished from the other Rogers in his family by calling him Roger the Great de Montgomery. It's noteworthy that Arundel Castle is the only one of the 6 Raapal castles of Sussex to remain occupied and in use by descendants of those who participated in the Norman invasion. Arundel Castle's owner is not, however, a descendant of the original builder. Roger de Montgomery's descendants lost custody of the castle in 1102 due to treason against King Henry I. Of course, the castle doesn't greatly resemble what it looked like under the original Roger de Montgomery. It's been upgraded, attacked, and captured, damaged, and rebuilt, and today is one of the more attractive castles in England. The castle is today the seat of the Dukes of Norfolk. The 18th Duke, Edward William Fitzalan Howard, is a descendant of William the Conqueror himself, and also of 4 other kings of England. The Duke of Norfolk is quite the important person, being the premier duke in the peerage of England and also as Earl of Arundel, the premier earl. By virtue of this precedence among his fellow dukes and peers of the realm, the duke also holds the important ceremonial position of Earl Marshal and is the hereditary Marshal of England. Interestingly, the duke is also a descendant of the lords of Bramber, who administered the Raap of Bramber and built the castle I'll describe next. These were the 4 Raaps in existence at the time of the Norman Conquest, but about 7 years later, around 1073, King William I created a 5th Raap in between Arundel and Lewes, using parts of western Lewes and eastern Arundel. This was done in order to better secure the vital waterway of the river known today as the River Adur. But because at that time the river's name was Bramber, the new Raap was named after the river, and that is the name also used for the castle and the village which eventually grew up around it. This new Raap was put into the charge of a nobleman named William, who was the Lord of Briouze in Normandy. He comes down to us in history, however, with the name William de Braose. Like Arundel, the new Raap didn't have either a secure fortification or an administrative center, so de Braose had to build one. He chose for his castle a site close to the town of Stenning, which was at the time an important port on the Bramber. As you can see, the castle is only barely recognizable as a castle. Only one wall of its gate tower is still standing. The central motte, or mound, which used to feature a keep, only hosts trees, and only some parts of the outer curtain wall are still standing. One feature of the castle is, however, still there and still in operation, and that's the church that de Braose built just outside the castle wall. It is still in use as the local parish church. Arundel Raap remained in its 1073 borders for about 200 years until sometime between 1250 and 1262, when it was again divided into 2, when a new Raap, called after the city of Chichester, was created from western Arundel. This was in the reign of King Henry III. Who was the first lord of Chichester? It's unknown, because there are no documents recording the actual splitting of Arundel Raap. In fact, some historians are of the opinion that the Raap of Chichester was already separate at the time of the conquest, but had been combined with Arundel by the conqueror so he could give the combined Raap to Roger de Montgomery. Like the other 5 Raaps, Chichester had a castle, and it was built by the first lord of Arundel, that's Roger de Montgomery, well before Chichester became a Raap. It started as a timber construct, like Hastings, Lewes, and Bramber castles, but was never reworked in stone. So there is nothing left of it now, except for the motte or mound of the castle. It, like Bramber's, also hosts trees instead of a structure. Well, there we have the 6 Raaps of Sussex. These remained administrative units within Sussex for the next 500 or 600 years, but by 1960 all of the remaining few administrative responsibilities of the Raaps had been given up to the county councils, and their only functions became part of history. Even a partial discussion of Sussex's 950-year post-Norman invasion history would take more than one full video, so I can't do it justice here. But I'll cover a few noteworthy events in brief. First of all, there was the 100 Years' War. This was a series of conflicts waged from 1337 to 1453 by the House of Plantagenet, rulers of the Kingdom of England, against the French House of Valois over the right to rule the Kingdom of France. There were several notable battles that took place during this period, including the battles of Crécy in 1346 and Agincourt in 1415, where in both cases England prevailed over France on French ground. Sussex's involvement in this 116-year-long conflict came simply because its coastline faced France, and some ports, especially Hastings, experienced raids by the French. Then in 1381 and 1450, there were rebellions that involved people in many areas of England, including Sussex. These were the Peasants' Revolt, Jack Cade's Rebellion, and the Revolt of the Merfold brothers. The first two originated outside of Sussex and involved some people in Sussex, but John and William Merfold were Sussex men and raised virtually all their followers from Sussex. Of course, all these revolts were either put down or failed to generate the hoped-for social progress. The English Civil War took place a couple hundred years later, between 1642 and 1651. With the exception of a couple of battles between royalists and parliamentarians, Sussex remained relatively quiet. Those battles took place in Arundel and Bramber in 1643 and 1644. Besides those two battles, the last act of the Civil War took place partly within Sussex. This was the escape of King Charles II after his forces were defeated at the Battle of Worcester. Charles's escape concluded in Sussex with his taking ship for France at Shoreham. Worcester is merely 100 miles from the borders of Sussex, but because there was a huge hunt for him, it took the king nearly a month and a half to cover the circuitous route he was forced to take. In the end, he had to travel over 625 miles, first towards Scotland, then down through Gloucestershire, Somerset, Dorset, Wiltshire, Hampshire, and finally Sussex. 9 years were to pass before the monarchy was restored and Charles II resumed his role of king. The flight of the king through Sussex is commemorated by signs along footpaths and bridleways called collectively Monarch's Way. It does seem obvious that in all these historical situations, Sussex's geographical position in relation to France is extremely important. And it seems that every time that country caught cold, Sussex would sneeze. Although in fairness, it wasn't always France's fault. During each of the periods when England and then the United Kingdom found itself at war against France, or allied with a France at war with some other country, Sussex would get refortified as one of the counties on the front line. To summarize, first was the Norman invasion in 1066. Then the 100 Years' War, actually 116 years long, from 1337 to 1453. This was one of the most notable conflicts of the Middle Ages, in which 5 generations of kings from 2 rival dynasties fought for the throne of the largest kingdom in Western Europe, namely that of France. Later, between 1744 and 1779, there were 3 planned invasions of England by France, which would have landed in Sussex and Kent. The first, in 1744, actually set sail, but failed due to the French fleet being heavily damaged by weather. The second, in 1759, never set sail, because several serious defeats suffered by the French Navy made the invasion impractical. The last one, in 1779, was a combined operation of both the French and Spanish navies. It actually set sail, but a comedy of errors of navigation, miscommunications, disease, food shortages, and bad weather caused it to return to port, having accomplished nothing. Then there was Napoleon I, who likewise made serious preparations for an invasion of England, but which, due to the Royal Navy's control of the English Channel, had to be abandoned. Napoleon I wasn't the last Bonaparte who schemed to invade England. His nephew, Napoleon III, also gave semi-serious thought to it after becoming emperor in 1852, but nothing came of that either. In all these situations, there Sussex was right in the crosshairs. On the other hand, Napoleon III was a surprisingly dynamic emperor, and his reforms in France resulted in, among other things, a modernization of the French Navy that included new ship technologies, such as ironclad battleships powered by steam and armed with the most advanced artillery of the time. This worried British planners, who realized that despite the general superiority of the Royal Navy, the new French ships coming online were superior. During the First World War, a little over 50 years later, Sussex was again on the line. This time, France was allied with the United Kingdom against Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, with enemy forces just across the Channel. This time, however, it was the men of Sussex who were over there, in the form of several battalions of the Royal Sussex Regiment. On 30 June 1916, the 11th, 12th, and 13th South Downs battalions of the regiment went over the top and attacked the German lines as part of the overall Battle of the Somme at Boar's Head near Richebourg, France. It was a valiant effort, but a number of screw-ups at high command, as well as the Germans being aware of the attack in advance, led to the attack's failure with extremely high casualties. The number of dead in the battle led that day forever being labeled as the day Sussex died. 4 men of the Royal Sussex Regiment earned the highest award for valor in World War I, 2 of them posthumously. One of the recipients lost his life while in action on that 30 June 1916 at Boar's Head. He was Company Sergeant Major Nelson Victor Carter. The citation for his award reads as follows: "For most conspicuous bravery. During an attack, he was in command of the 4th wave of the assault. Under intense shell and machine gun fire, he penetrated with a few men into the enemy's 2nd line and inflicted heavy casualties with bombs. When forced to retire to the enemy's 1st line, he captured a machine gun and shot the gunner with his revolver. Finally, after carrying several wounded men into safety, he was himself mortally wounded and died in a few minutes. His conduct throughout the day was magnificent. It is noteworthy to mention that he fell, having returned to no man's land 7 times, each time bringing back a wounded man. It was only when he stood up for an 8th trip that a German sniper found his mark in Carter's chest, and he fell back into the trench." The so-called war to end wars did not, after all, end war. And just 21 years later, Sussex found itself one more time part of the country's front line, with its airfields playing a key role in the Battle of Britain, and with its towns being frequently bombed by the Luftwaffe. The Royal Sussex Regiment again found itself serving the nation in every theatre of the war. Sussex itself took an active part in the war. Besides being fortified for a German invasion that fortunately never happened, it was one of the staging areas for both the Dieppe raid in 1942 and the D-Day landings in 1945. There is still a monument to the Canadian Forces soldiers who were stationed near Worthing, of whom many died or were captured in the Dieppe raid. Because so many native Sussex military units were overseas, the Home Guard were the primary defenders of the county, along with the help of the 1st Canadian Army. Thank heaven for the end of the war. It's now been 954 years since the last successful invasion of Sussex, unless you count this Yank's arrival in 2016. That will do. The full history of Sussex would require several detailed videos to give the subject justice, but we're done with it for now. This video is part 3 of What is Sussex? Part 4 will be the final part, and it will cover Sussex today. Stay tuned. This has been a production of a Yank In Sussex. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button. If you haven't already done so, feel free to click the subscribe button along with the notification bell in order to be notified when new videos are posted on the channel. May you have a very nice day.